They didn't even look up when I carried the folding chairs out of the garage by myself. 16 metal chairs, clanking like hell, dragging them over gravel while my brothers sipped cold beers by the dock, feet up like it was their personal resort. My name's Rachel. I'm 38. I live in Columbus, Ohio, and every damn summer I show up to my dad's lake house in Michigan for the annual family reunion, whether I want to or not. Quick note, before listening, share which city or country you're watching from. It's always the same setup. Nate and Brian roll in with their wives and kids, getting the biggest bedrooms, taking over the kitchen, tossing their crap on every available surface. I'm the quiet, reliable one. That's how Dad introduced me to his new neighbor last year. Not smart, not funny, reliable, like a wrench in a toolbox. This year, I showed up early like usual. I bought all the drinks, loaded the coolers, got the grill prepped. Nobody asked me to. They never do. But if I didn't do it, it wouldn't get done. The trash bags would pile up, the kids would be eating hot dogs off napkins, and somehow that'd still be my fault. You ever think about loosening up, Rach? Brian smirked while I stacked burger buns on a tray. Maybe next year you'll bring a +1, huh? Gotta have a life for that, Nate added, not even looking up from his phone. Dad barked a laugh. She's married to her job, boys. Somebody's gotta keep the tax office running, right? The tax office is a regional CPA firm I've worked at for 16 years. I'm senior manager. But sure, keep making it sound like I do payroll in a basement. Later, Aunt Judy, who I haven't seen since the Obama years, cornered me near the grill. Still doing accounting, is it? Yep, just wrapped up another audit season. Oh, that's nice. Meanwhile, Nate's oldest just got into Vanderbilt. Cool. One kid plays with firecrackers, unsupervised. The other gets into college, and suddenly it's a royal court out here. Still, I smiled. I set out paper plates. I cleaned up the juice box puddles. I replaced the ice bags in the coolers when nobody noticed they'd melted. I let them talk over me. Let them laugh at stories they've already told a dozen times. But something felt different this year. I could feel it in my spine, in my jaw. That tight, familiar ache of holding it all in while everyone around me took and took and took. I looked out at the dock, where Brian's kid just spilled orange soda all over the boat cushions. No one even reacted. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked inside. Time to fire up the grill. The grill flared when I opened the lid, smoke rolling up into my face. I didn't even get a second to wipe the sweat from my neck before Nate yelled from the deck, "How's it coming down there, Rach?" The kids are starving. I bit my tongue and flipped the burgers. Back at the patio table, everyone had a plate and a drink in hand. Everyone except me. I brought out the hot dogs, passed the buns, refilled the condiments when someone knocked over the ketchup. Still, no one looked in my direction unless they needed something. You guys remember our trip to Cancun last winter? Brian's wife, Melissa, said loud enough to pull the whole table in. 5-star resort, bottomless margaritas. Best week of our lives. That was right before I got promoted, right? Brian added. Regional sales lead now. Comes with a company truck. Dad leaned back in his chair, arms crossed like he was supervising a board meeting. You boys have done well. That's what I like to see. Then Nate chimed in. I've been looking at a rental property in Traverse City. Might be my first step toward building a portfolio. Dad nodded like a king knighting his son. Smart thinking. You know, I've been thinking about who'll take over the business when I step down. That pulled the air out of the table for a second. I paused near the cooler, half listening. Obviously, it'll stay in the family, Dad continued. I mean, between the two of you, that's assuming we even want it, Brian laughed. They all laughed. I waited. No one turned to me, not even a glance. A minute later, Dad waved a hand at me like I was a waitress. Rachel, can you run to the store? We're low on propane. Should have checked earlier, but I forgot. I didn't answer right away, just held his stare for a second longer than normal. He raised his eyebrows. What? Yeah, I muttered. I'll go. I got in my car without grabbing my own dinner. It hit me hard on the drive. I'd been hauling this load for so long, setting up, showing up, covering gaps they didn't even realize were there. And still, I was invisible unless something needed fixing or fetching. By the time I got back, the sun had dipped low. Everyone was full and buzzed and loud. The kids had disappeared inside, and the adults were circling up in lawn chairs, trading celebration gifts, a new thing Melissa brought in this year. She handed Brian a box of whiskey glasses. Nate got some kind of fancy leather wallet. Then Dad turned to me with a grin. We didn't forget you, Rachel, he said, dragging over a busted-looking cardboard box. Inside were leftover 4th of July decorations, half-used sunscreen, and a bunch of unmatched koozies. Your very own supply kit, Brian said, trying not to laugh. Nate chuckled. Now you'll be prepared for all your solo barbecues. The room cracked up. I didn't. Then Dad added, Lucky you're in the family, huh? Otherwise, who'd keep us running? That was it. I stared at them, their stupid, smug faces, their casual cruelty wrapped up in lazy jokes. It wasn't even the box or the errand or being passed over again. It was the fact they didn't see it. Any of it. I set the box down, stood up, and walked inside. Not a single person followed. I shut the bedroom door behind me and locked it. The sound of laughter still floated up from downstairs, muffled through the old walls of the lake house. They were probably making s'mores, toasting to each other's genius, to their next big thing. The box of junk they gave me was sitting on the floor by the dresser. I didn't touch it. I sat on the edge of the bed, fingers digging into the mattress. My jaw was tight. My brain was buzzing. It wasn't just tonight. It wasn't just one stupid joke. It was Brian calling me at midnight last year because his truck wouldn't start, and me showing up with jumper cables and a thermos of coffee. It was Nate forgetting his mortgage was due and asking if I could spot him, just until his bonus came in. It never did. It was Dad handing me financial statements with a straight face, asking if I could take a quick look, when he damn well knew his business was drowning, and he didn't want my advice, just my signature on the check. I grabbed my phone off the nightstand, opened the calculator app, $400 for Nate's rent in 2019, $1,000 for Brian's transmission rebuild, $800 for that busted air conditioning unit at Dad's office. I kept going, tallying every stupid thing I had paid for, loaned, covered, or gifted over the past decade. The number climbed fast. I stopped when it hit 22,000, and that was just what I remembered off the top of my head. I opened the Notes app, started listing dates and names. I remembered every single one. How could I not? There was one that stuck harder than the rest. 4 years ago, Dad was in deep on a property deal. Thought he could flip a waterfront duplex for a quick profit. The market tanked, and he panicked. Came to me one night, quiet and pale, asking if I could temporarily pay off the short-term loan to avoid default. I drained my savings account, canceled a trip I had been planning for 2 years. He never paid me back, never even asked how it impacted me. And I let it slide. That was the part that burned. I let it all slide. I got up and paced the room. My skin felt hot. My chest was tight. I wasn't sad. I was pissed. I'd spent years trying to earn a seat at a table I had already built. I opened my laptop and started digging, pulled up old bank statements, cross-referenced emails. The more I found, the clearer it became. I had been funding this family's mess for years, silently, willingly, stupidly. And for what? So I could be handed a box of half-used party supplies and laughed at like the family intern? That was done. I didn't know the exact move yet, but I knew what I wasn't doing anymore. I wasn't biting my tongue, I wasn't writing another check, I wasn't playing the part they'd cast me in just because it made everything easier for them. I was going to get their attention, and not by begging. I sat back down, opened a blank doc, and typed one sentence. Stop pretending they see you. Then I started outlining everything I needed to do. Passwords to change, assets to check, legal paperwork to review. It would take time, I knew that. But I was done asking for respect from people who only saw me when their lives needed buffering. They were about to find out exactly who they'd been leaning on, and what it felt like when she finally stood up. 3 weeks later, my phone buzzed while I was at work, buried in quarterly reports. I saw my dad's name on the screen and nearly let it go to voicemail. Should've. Hey, kiddo, he said when I picked up, tone too casual. Quick favor. I already knew what that meant. He cleared his throat. I've got a couple minor issues on the books. Nothing serious, just some confusion on the new investment stuff. Thought maybe you could look it over since, you've got the accounting background. I didn't say yes, I didn't say no. I just told him to send the files and hung up. An hour later, I had 6 PDFs sitting in my inbox with no subject line and one sentence. Just some paperwork? Appreciate you. I opened the first file and felt my stomach tighten. By the time I finished the second, I stopped pretending this was minor. The family business wasn't just unstable, it was hanging by a thread. Maxed out lines of credit, unpaid invoices stretching back 8 months, and weird double entries that looked like they were cooked to keep things from showing up on the annual reports. Someone had been moving numbers around to delay the damage. Then I found the newest one, the big opportunity Dad had hinted at last Christmas, a restaurant investment in Detroit. He'd gone in with a partner who bailed halfway through construction, leaving Dad stuck with the lease, contractor debt, and a worthless build-out that was already 2 months behind schedule. If he didn't cover the balloon payment by October, the bank would seize part of the company's assets, including the property tied to the main office. I leaned back in my chair, eyes still locked on the numbers. So that was the plan all along. When things got too hot, call Rachel. Ask her to take a quick look and hope she'd throw money at the fire before asking what caused it. I clicked over to my banking portal. I'd paid off the old property taxes on that building 2 years ago, quietly, just so Dad wouldn't default. And now he was risking it again, like it was his personal playground. I printed every file, stacked them neatly in a folder. Then I texted my lawyer. Need to talk. This week. Family business. Urgent. By Friday afternoon, I was sitting across from her in her downtown office, documents laid out between us. She scanned through each page while I talked her through what I'd found. When I finished, she looked up. Rachel, this isn't just mismanagement. This is exposure. If the business collapses, you're tethered to it. Any financial tie, any unprotected asset, they could come after it. I want out, I said. Completely. I want protection, paperwork. I want everything that's mine off their books. I don't care how long it takes. She nodded. We'll start with the separation of interest. Ownership clause reviews. Have you been contributing financially recently? Not officially, I said. But I want to document everything. Every check, every dollar. Every time I bailed them out. We scheduled a second meeting. I left with a checklist that looked more like a war plan. And that was fine. I wasn't going into this half-measured. That weekend, I cleared a space in my home office, labeled folders, highlighted years of bank statements, cross-referenced dates with family events. Every favor they'd asked, I logged it. And for the first time, I wasn't cleaning up their mess to make life easier. I was gathering ammo. They had no idea the ship was sinking, but I did, and I'd be damned if I went down with it. I called the meeting myself, Sunday afternoon at the lake house. Same spot they used to joke I should be grateful to even sit in. This time, I picked the time. I told them to show up. Not asked, not suggested. Told. Dad didn't argue. Neither did Nate or Brian. That alone told me they knew something was coming. They sat around the dining table, all three with coffee cups and forced patience like they had somewhere better to be. Melissa didn't come. Neither did the kids. That was fine. I placed a thick folder on the table and sat down. I'm not here to babysit your egos, I said. This is about money, mine mostly. So I'm going to talk, and you're going to listen. Brian snorted. Jesus, Rachel, dramatic much? Shut up and listen, I snapped. He blinked but said nothing else. I opened the folder and pulled out a spreadsheet. Color-coded, line-itemed, dated. I slid a copy to each of them. Every dollar I've put into this family since 2015. That's when I paid off the lien on Dad's business property, so the IRS wouldn't seize it. I also covered the HVAC repair, the utility bills that got missed, and the 3 months Nate couldn't pay his mortgage. Dad squinted at the paper. Where'd you get all this? My bank statements, your emails, your voicemails asking for help. Nate leaned forward. Okay, hold on. Nobody made you do any of that. No, you just counted on me doing it. Every single time. I pulled out another sheet. This is the restaurant deal. The one Dad said was a minor situation. It's 2 months behind on payments, and the collateral tied to the balloon loan is the building housing the family business. Dad waved a hand like he was brushing off dust. You're making this sound worse than it is. It's a short-term problem. A misunderstanding. No, I said. It's negligence, and it's over. Brian shook his head. So what? This is about your feelings? You want a pat on the back for being responsible? I want the truth on the table, I said. And I want to change. They all sat back like I'd said a dirty word. I'm transferring ownership, I continued. My lawyer is filing to move the business under my control. Full operational oversight. If you don't like it, you can walk away. But I'm done watching you drive this thing into a wall. Dad's face turned red. That business is my legacy. It was, and you nearly buried it under loans you never disclosed. You lost the right to call it yours when you started gambling on restaurants and hoping nobody noticed. You don't have the authority, Nate said. You're not even on the board. I smirked. I've funded enough of this mess to own a controlling share if I want. You think I didn't come prepared? I pulled out the final document, a signed agreement from 3 years ago, where Dad listed me as a silent financial partner to secure a loan. I slid it across the table. Dad paled. That wasn't meant to be permanent. Doesn't matter. You signed it. You needed the money, and I gave it to you. That signature gives me a foot in the door. And trust me, I'm kicking it wide open. Brian stood up, hands on his hips. You're serious about this? I've never been more serious in my life. You're gonna tear this family apart. No, I said. You already did that. I'm just done pretending it didn't happen. They stared at me like I'd grown a second head, but I didn't flinch. I'm not here to fix your problems anymore. I'm not here to play the assistant, the ATM, or the quiet sister who stays out of the way. Either you take responsibility or I walk. And I take everything I've invested with me. Dad pushed his chair back, stood up, and pointed a finger in my face. This is betrayal. I stood too. No, this is a reckoning. You just never thought I'd be the one to deliver it. The text started that night. Brian, you've lost it. Seriously. Who the hell do you think you are? Nate, you just spit in Dad's face. We'll never forget this. Dad, reconsider before you do something you can't undo. I didn't respond. Not to a single one. I let them sit there in my notifications like old voicemails I didn't need to hear again. They didn't want dialogue. They wanted compliance. By Monday, Dad had emailed a revised proposal. All legal language, full of vague promises and conditions. The subject line just said, new terms, let's be reasonable. I sent it straight to my lawyer. He didn't call, didn't show up at my door, just kept sending messages with less and less warmth. The last one ended with, this is not how families operate. But the truth? That was exactly how ours operated. They demanded, I delivered. Until now. At work, my manager called me in for a closed-door meeting. You've been leading circles around people twice your level, she said, sliding a folder toward me. We want to promote you, senior director, more responsibility, more visibility. I stared at the folder. I should have felt proud, but instead I hesitated. She raised an eyebrow. Everything okay? Yeah, I said, but my voice came out thinner than I wanted, because I wasn't sure anymore. I'd spent years climbing this ladder, always with one hand tied behind my back, stuck running errands for a family that barely acknowledged I had a career at all. Now that I had a shot at something real, something mine, I didn't know if I wanted to keep living in their shadow, even from a distance. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat with it in silence. I thought about how many times I'd chased their approval like it was oxygen. Dad's rare nods of approval, my brother's half-assed praise when I bailed them out. The way they made me feel like being useful was the closest I'd ever get to being valued. It was pathetic. I opened my laptop and booked an appointment with a financial advisor, someone independent, someone who didn't know a damn thing about the family business. When I met with her the following week, she didn't flinch when I told her I was untangling from a family-held corporation. First thing we're doing, she said, tapping her pen against her tablet, is building a firewall. Personal assets go in one direction. Family junk stays far away. I nodded. Exactly what I need. Then let's talk exit strategy. We mapped out a full portfolio review, planned a retirement path, and dug into long-term options. I walked out of that meeting with a clear head and a list of tasks I actually wanted to do. I wasn't chasing scraps anymore. I was building something that couldn't be taken from me with a guilt trip and a grunt. Still, the silence from them lingered. The group chats? Dead. Holidays? No invites. Birthdays? Ignored. And yeah, it stung. Not because I missed the chaos, I didn't, but because deep down, some small part of me still wanted them to see me, not as a bank account or a backup plan, just as someone who mattered. But they never would. That was the truth. So I stopped waiting. I canceled the backup phone line Dad had used to call in favors. I moved my accounts to a private bank. I even changed the locks on the family storage unit, the one I'd paid for, and took inventory of everything inside. Half of it was mine anyway. I was done being the background character in their legacy. They could hate me all they wanted. I wasn't backing down. It started with a headline. Longtime Midwest supply chain firm faces financial turmoil amid leadership dispute. My coworker forwarded it to me before lunch. No subject line, just the link. The article spelled it all out. Unpaid creditors, shaky investments, internal instability. No names listed, but it didn't need them. Anyone in our network knew exactly who it was. My father's name hadn't been in a newspaper in years. Now it was the punchline of an exposé. 2 days later, one of his former business partners called my office line. Rachel, the guy said, voice smooth, too friendly. Heard what happened. Some of us are wondering if you're taking over operations. There's concern about the company's future. I'm not involved, I said flatly. You'll need to speak to my father. Well, with the current situation, we were hoping to discuss alternatives. I'm not available, I cut in. Good luck. I hung up before he could try to butter me up with flattery I didn't need. These men had ignored me for years. Now they saw me as the cleanup crew. Not happening. By the end of the week, both Nate and Brian had texted, called, emailed, all acting like the collapse was sudden, shocking, unfair. Nate, you happy now? Look what you started. Brian, he's in over his head and you know it. Don't let pride ruin this family. I didn't reply. I sent a copy of every message to my lawyer and marked them unread. Dad tried the fatherly angle next. He left a voicemail, voice low and heavy. Rachel, this is bigger than you. You think I don't see what you're doing, but I do. And I know you're smarter than this. You always have been, but you've made your point. It's time to come home and put this right. I deleted it. This wasn't home. It never had been. It was a stage, and I'd been the unpaid tech crew making sure the show ran smooth. The pressure kept building, but I stayed out of it. I didn't show up to meetings. I didn't respond to panicked emails from vendors who somehow got my contact info. I had already warned them. I wasn't their safety net. Eventually, the silence took over. The texts stopped. Calls went dry. Dad stopped pretending to fix things with guilt. Brian posted some passive-aggressive meme on Facebook about people who betray their blood. I rolled my eyes and blocked him. Even Nate, the quieter one, the one who usually played both sides, gave up. No holiday invites. No updates about his kids. Just nothing. And yeah, I felt the gap. I'd be lying if I said I didn't. I felt it in the quiet of my apartment, when I wasn't triple booked for their emergencies. I felt it on Sunday mornings when no one expected me to drive across town with a trunk full of paper towels and folding chairs. But underneath that emptiness was something else, something quieter, cleaner, relief. They weren't calling because they knew they couldn't push me anymore. They weren't asking for help because they finally understood I wasn't going to give it. I had stepped back and the house of cards started falling, and I didn't flinch. I spent those weeks finishing my asset transfers, closing out old joint accounts, and reworking every trace of my financial life. My advisor called it a total firewall. I called it peace. I declined the work promotion, not because I didn't deserve it, I did, but because I realized I didn't need the title to prove anything anymore. I wasn't chasing visibility. I wanted ownership of my time, my decisions, my future. One night, I drove past the old office building my dad used to call his empire. The lights were off, a for sale sign was staked in the lawn. I didn't slow down. The skyline outside my new apartment window looked nothing like Ohio. I'd relocated to Denver just 6 weeks earlier, packed up my life in 2 days, handed in my resignation the next, and didn't look back. No farewell parties, no dramatic send-off. Just me, a U-Haul, and the clean break I'd earned. Now, I sat in a glass-walled conference room of a tech startup, reviewing hiring plans and vendor contracts with the founder. She was sharp, decisive, reminded me of the version of myself I'd almost never met. She closed her laptop. Honestly, you've already saved us 6 months of headaches. I nodded once. That's what I do. Wrong, she said, smiling. That's what you did. Now you build. No more patching holes? Her words stuck with me. That night, after dinner, I checked my mailbox for the first time in days. Buried between flyers and coupons was a cream-colored envelope with real handwriting on the front. No return address. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single page from someone I hadn't thought about in years. Hi, Rachel. I don't know if you remember me. Cheryl, your dad's old office manager. I heard through a friend what happened and just wanted to say, good for you. I saw a lot back then. How much you gave, how little they saw you. You didn't imagine it. You weren't crazy. You were just surrounded by men who needed you small so they could feel big. If you're ever in the mood for coffee, I'm in Boulder now. And proud of you. I read it twice, then folded it neatly and slid it into the back of my planner. Not because I needed the validation, but because it felt like a tiny crack of light, proving the outside world had noticed what I'd endured. The following week, I was invited to speak at a local charity event for women in business. One of the organizers had heard about my transition into leadership and wanted someone to talk about boundary setting and financial empowerment. I almost declined. Then I said yes. The room was small, maybe 40 people, folding chairs and plastic cups of sparkling water. Nothing fancy. But when I stood at the mic, I didn't feel nervous. I felt clear. I spent years in a role I didn't apply for, I said. The family fixer, the unpaid advisor, the fallback. I thought if I was useful enough, maybe they'd treat me like I mattered. A few women nodded, arms crossed tight. I kept pouring into people who never looked down to see I was drowning. Until one day I stopped. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just started walking in the other direction. It was quiet, the kind of quiet where people are really listening. I'm not here to tell you it was easy. I lost a lot. But what I gained? Peace, ownership, sleep. And for the first time in my life, I don't need anyone's permission to take up space. Afterward, 3 women pulled me aside. One cried. One asked for help with a similar situation. One just hugged me. That night, I sat on my balcony, looking out at the city lights. I didn't feel powerful. I didn't feel invincible. I just felt real, grounded, like I belonged to myself again. The woman who used to chase after thank yous and maybe next year promises was gone. She'd done her job. She'd kept the family from sinking for a long time. But now she was living her own life. And damn, it felt good. Christmas morning, my phone buzzed just after 8. I was still in pajamas, coffee in hand, standing barefoot in my kitchen watching snow fall on the street below. The message came through in one line. Hope you're doing all right. Would like to talk sometime. Dad. No guilt, no blame. Just that. And still, it felt heavier than anything he'd sent before. I didn't reply. I sat with it for a while, letting the silence stretch out. No wave of nostalgia hit me. No flash of some childhood memory to soften the edge. Just the reminder that he was still out there, still circling the mess he helped create, looking for a door back in. A few hours later, my phone rang again. This time, it was Nate. I stared at the screen for a second before answering. Hey, he said, voice low, unsure. I know it's been weird. I just figured, with it being Christmas, I didn't say anything. Look, he went on, I know we pushed you too far, all of us, and I know you don't owe us anything. I just thought maybe we could start over, someday, if that's something you'd want. The old me would have jumped at that, clung to it like a rope, grasped for the first scrap of warmth and tried to rebuild the whole house from it. But I didn't need scraps anymore. I'm good, Nate, I said. Really? Yeah, he replied after a beat. I figured. Just wanted you to know I get it now. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. When we hung up, I didn't feel relief or sadness, just clarity. These weren't wounds I had to keep tending to. They never belonged to me in the first place. I'd just been the one cleaning up after them. I tossed on my coat and walked to the park down the block. The cold bit at my face, but I didn't mind. The paths were quiet, peaceful, nobody asking anything, nobody needing anything. I sat on a bench and watched the snow fall, not waiting, not hoping, just being. And that was more than enough.